In 2019, the Washington Post published an article about the working conditions of the supply chains for Hershey, Nestle, and Mars. They reported that none of these companies can guarantee that their supply chains are free of child labor. Now, when I talk about child labor, what I mean is young children working long days under grueling conditions for very little pay. One farmer put the point like this, quote, "I admit that it is a kind of slavery, but they bring them here to work and it's the boss who takes the money." Now, one of the most important motivations for the stakeholder theory that we're about to talk about in this video are cases like this one. It is wrong for major chocolate producers to manage their operations in ways that externalize the true cost of their products onto children. Companies should be governed with the children's interests in mind as well. And stakeholders say that the purpose of a corporation is to build value for stakeholders. In A Stakeholder Theory of the Modern Corporation, the business ethicist R. Edward Freeman focuses on the following stakeholders. He focuses on owners, suppliers, management, employees, the local community, customers, and of course, stockholders. Now, one question that you might ask is, which stakeholder group is the most important? And according to Freeman's theory, we should not give primacy to one stakeholder group over some other stakeholder group. Instead, quote, "Managers must keep the relationships among stakeholders in balance." Now, according to Freeman, there are many different potential stakeholder theories. There's not just one. But all stakeholder theories start with something called a normative core. A normative core is a set of sentences that answer basic questions about how corporations should be managed and why they should be managed in those ways. For example, a utilitarian normative core might say that a corporation should be managed in whatever way maximizes well-being impartially for all affected parties. A Kantian normative core might say that businesses should be managed in a way such that humanity is treated never merely as a means, but always as an end in itself. And a natural law normative core might say that a business should be managed in such a way that it fosters important human goods and never damages those important human goods. Now, if those terms I just read are unfamiliar to you, that's totally fine. You might want to review the Introduction to Moral Theory module or come back to this part after you've studied that module. Now, Freeman favored a normative core that was called the Doctrine of Fair Contracts. And we're going to explain what this means. So imagine that you are a rational, self-interest individual negotiating with other rational, self-interested individuals in order to come up with a set of rules for governing business. Now, you know the general facts about how the corporate world works, but you don't know which stakeholder group you will belong to. You don't know if you'll be a corporate executive, a customer, a supplier, a member of the local community, a stockholder, or somebody else. So what rules should you choose under those circumstances? Well, according to Freeman, there are 6 rules that you should choose. So the first is the principle of entry and exit. So any contract must have clear conditions for entry, exit, and renegotiation. So in other words, it should be clear to you how to enter a contract, how to exit a contract, and how to renegotiate it when you need to. Second principle is the principle of governance, and that says that the basic rules of the game, when they are changed, everyone must consent. So recall the case of Dodge versus Ford from my video about the legal basis for the shareholder primacy view. That was a case where a majority stakeholder, Henry Ford, changed the rules of the game in a way that would not promote the interests of others, but it would promote his own interests. So it would hurt the Dodge brothers. He didn't want to pay dividends to them because he wanted to buy out their shares at a low price. Would you agree to live in a world where those kinds of things can happen if you were just as likely to be one of the Dodge brothers as you were to be Henry Ford? So Freeman thinks the answer is no, which is his reason for supporting the principle of governance. The next principle is the principle of externalities. So it goes like this. If a contract between 2 or more parties imposes a cost upon a party not in the contract, then that additional party shall have the option to join and renegotiate the contract. So in other words, if I form a contract with Susan where I get to dump toxic waste in her backyard, but then some of that toxic waste ruins your garden, that's not fair to you. Since you are affected, you need to be part of the contract and be compensated for it. Next principle is the principle of contracting costs. So all parties in the contract must share in the cost of contracting. Now, coming up with a good contract is expensive. It takes time and it takes money. And if you and I are coming up with a contract, it's not fair to you if you have to pay all of those costs. We should share in the costs. The next of Freeman's principles is the agency principle, and that says that any agents must serve the interests of all parties, all principals. And so what this means in practice is that if I hire somebody to represent me, that person shouldn't be looking to steal value from my customers and suppliers and give it to me. Instead, my agents should seek to foster the interests of all the stakeholders in my business. And lastly, we have the principle of limited immortality. So corporations must be managed as if they would exist indefinitely. And what this means is that I shouldn't look after my business as if it was going to close tomorrow. I should be looking after the long-term interests of my corporation. And if you are one of my stakeholders who depends on my continued existence, this is also a principle that you would want. So in a nutshell, that's Freeman's stakeholder theory. Now, I would invite you to come up with your own stakeholder theory. So you can begin with a normative core. You can use Freeman's core, where we're choosing rules to govern business where we don't know what our own position is, or you can use your own. And then once you find that normative core, I want you to try to figure out what rules follow from it.